it's been a couple weeks now that you've been out of office. What has life been like? Have you been able to settle in, spend some time with family?
Yeah, no, it's you kind of have to get used to not having to wake up early, be on a plane in an hour, back on a plane, and but adjusting, between Alaska and Washington D.C. My son's still going to school, finishing out school in Washington, so back and forth. But you learn to adjust, and you just kind of get back up. There's a lot of things out there to do still, and as my wife would say, here's the first list. So I'm busy doing some things at the house, but also there's been groups that have come to me about projects they're working on that they want advice or thoughts on. So, still keeping active, but it is, you take a little while to adjust. And now the session is going in Juneau or in Washington D.C. and kind of watching that is also very interesting to see how that's all. They've been now 3 weeks on the same bill, and I thought things were going to change. So, the XL pipeline bill, which I'm sure will pass at some point, but they're just kind of stuck on this same bill. And tomorrow the president will make his State of the Union speech, which will be interesting to see where that all goes.
So definitely not disconnected yet. It seems like you're still obviously keeping track of what's going on with the state.
Absolutely.
And across the country as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've born and raised in the state. I've never not been active in some form or another. Last night I was up at an event for a nonprofit organization. There's a lot of work within the Alaska Native community, and we were talking about housing needs, and I'll always be involved in some form or another. I think it's important and being connected, but you can't not. Some people say, well, did you just kind of stop paying attention? There's a little period of time when I didn't turn on the news radio. No disrespect, I didn't watch the news for a few days. I turned on, my internet radio and just listened to music. And it was kind of refreshing, but, there's so much going on, and no question I'll continue. And people call and ask, or I'll be at a restaurant and someone will come over and start asking about some subject matter, and I'll say, well, here's where I would go to get some assistance on that. So still active, absolutely.
Still active,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Now, like
spending more time with my son. I think he's not excited about that. He's 7th grade, so he comes home from school and there I am, and that's not what, I don't know if he likes that. but
too much time with Dad now.
Too much time, but we're having a great time. It's great. Actually took a vacation, a real vacation, which was nice.
Definitely. So much needed.
Rest and rehabilitation, you might say, downtime. But, it's also kind of odd because my cell phone would ring, constantly when I was in the Senate. It's less frequent now, and it's kind of refreshing because, so many people glue to that technology. You don't have to be. So it's kind of nice. Yeah.
And so a question or a rumor, I would say, or a question that you've been asked by a lot of people is if you have any intention on running for mayor of Anchorage. Have you been able to think about that question?
I am thinking about it, but, I haven't made a real final decision. I've met with most of the candidates that are running. I live in the city, and it's my home, and I want to make sure that whoever runs really thinks about the future of Anchorage. I think there's a lot of need, and making sure they do the right thing, that's really kind of my interest. A lot of people speculate, which, that's what I learned about politics. There's more speculation than anything else. You think the stock market's a speculation market. Politics is a high level. So I know in the next few days I'll make a more definitive decision because I know filing deadline starts January 30th. But I think there's some interesting candidates out there. Many of them that I've talked to, I clearly have Anchorage's interest at heart. I think it's going to be a competitive race, more than I think people had first thought. I think you have Dan Coffey, who people assume is the front runner, and then Domboski, but now Ethan Berkowitz is thinking about it. Patrick Flynn is thinking about it. Andrew Helcrow now in the race. So suddenly you have kind of an interesting mix, and so I've been meeting with them and at least hearing their thoughts of where Anchorage needs to go. And of course, I'm not bashful at giving my thoughts, and we'll see.
Is there a particular determining factor that would make you want to run for mayor? Because you've done the job, you're experienced.
Right. I think that's a great question. I don't know if there's. I think I want to make sure, just as anyone would in Anchorage, want to make sure their city is moving forward, and I want to make sure the folks that are willing to run are going to do something. It's one thing just to occupy a seat. It's more important that you do something in that position. And what I'm getting a sense of from the folks that are interested in running, that they do want to do some things. And that's making me feel more comfortable that there is a good crew of folks running. In a lot of ways, I've enjoyed oddly enough, this last 2 months of a little bit of freedom, you might say. Been able to talk with folks from, the president on down without any conditions other than here's what I think and here's what I would hope, and it frees you up a lot to do some things. So in a lot of ways, I kind of like the role I have right now, but we'll see.
And speaking of, the mayor of Anchorage and some of the issues they're facing, there's a lot of talk about, increasing alcohol taxes with the decline in revenue. As mayor, what would you do to help, tackle some of these issues that Anchorage will be facing?
I think this is going to be a tough, with the state budget where it's at. Now, the good news is the state or the city doesn't receive a lot of money other than capital money, but operational money from the state, the revenue sharing, which some legislators have already said they're going to cut it totally, which will impact property owners here. And the alcohol tax, I know that's a proposal that's been laid on the table. The challenge is the city has to determine at some point what is the mix of revenue to support the services that the city needs. We're way down on police, in the sense of how many police officers should be on the street. We're way down in fire, which means you have less response time or slower response time potentially, which means cities at risk. And because of that, you need to make sure you have the revenue streams. And I think in a lot of ways, the alcohol tax, I've supported, in the past, when they've had an alcohol tax, I haven't supported as a single tax. I've supported tobacco tax in the city. But it's, I don't know if there's enough votes on the assembly to get it to the ballot. I'm not sure there's enough there to do that. I think the revenue end of the city, they're going to probably have to revamp some of the service levels they're delivering right now, because they're just not going to have the money like they used to. If you take 15 million or so out of revenue sharing, give or take, that's what they get from the state, that's a sizable amount of money. And because they're right up against or close against the tax cap, there's not a lot of room. So the alcohol tax still takes the vote of the people. You can't implement that money till next year. So it's not going to solve their problems this year.
It's a minor part of the problem.
Minor. They've had better, like the hotel motel tax, now it's 12%. It's done a great job in promoting, putting money in the city coffer, and taking care of the convention center. They had a purpose for it. And the voters were happy to support that because there was a purpose. If you don't have a purpose for that tax, meaning are you going to put more police officers in exchange for that, voters they would question that, right? You're going to say, well, okay, if we give you, the city government, more money, what are you going to do with it? And if you say, well, we're just going to fill the gap, that's not enough for a voter to say, okay. What they want to know is, if you do that, will you guarantee, for example, funding paramedics and police, which are impacted by alcohol abuse or substance abuse? So that's going to be the trick of how the assembly deals with that. If they're just going to fill the coffers, there'll be a mixed view out there, I think, on it. Even if it's popular, I think poll data will tell you it's probably popular. But I've seen those taxes that are popular in the polls, and they go to the vote, and they fail. Because voters at the end of the day want to know, if I'm giving government more money, what is the value I get for it? And if you don't have that answer, it's not going to happen. And right now, I think public safety is a huge gap in the city. There's no question. I mean, I'm amazed every time I see your newscast or open up a paper and see what's happening on the street. That's a problem. We have too few on the street cops right now.
Definitely. And speaking of enforcement, marijuana is the topic. I mean, it's going to be the topic during the legislative session.
Now, there's a revenue stream the city should figure out. It's going to happen. Why not figure out a revenue stream on a local level? The legislature has to be careful because the voters have spoken. I know some are like, maybe there's a way to curtail it. Well, you just better figure out how to manage it. And if it's a revenue stream, meaning you got to have some control cost to it, taxing, you got to deal with that. And then the big one, which I've seen some new technology, which I think is going to be important. Police officers are very nervous about this in the sense that right now, if you are abusing alcohol, they can test you, through a breathalyzer. But substance abuse or being under the influence of marijuana, there's not a real test. There's some new technology being developed right now. And that is going to be the challenge, that hopefully the legislature in their regulatory process figures out how to deal with that. Because if they can deal with that, then you deal with the public safety piece of it, which is people under the influence. And then from the local end, they should look at it as a revenue stream. It's going to happen. It's law. Voters have voted. You know, people who want to debate it can debate it, but it's happened. And you can't reverse that action for a minimum of 2 years under state law. So it's going to happen. So why not figure out how to manage it, control it, and if the city thinks it's a revenue stream, so be it.
And is there any particular solution that maybe you would use to help with those issues that the police might have with marijuana if you were mayor?
Yeah, I think one of the things we would want to be very aggressive about is figuring out, you know, how and what kind of resources they would need, and if the state is going to regulate it and have some sort of revenue stream, like we do with the Alcohol and Beverage Control Board. You know, when you buy a liquor license, a certain amount of that money goes into that board for regulation purposes. So it manages it. You get a liquor license to sell liquor, then there's a regulatory that manages it, so you're paying for that cost. You may want to have that same loop as the state develops whatever those policies are, that the state just doesn't take that money and dump it into their general fund, because the impacts are not going to be on the state level, they're going to be on the local level. So somehow that money needs to flow back, if there is any state money connected in taxing it or whatever they might do with it. And that should be going to local governments, in my opinion, because the police departments are going to be ones dealing with this. And not in necessarily a negative way, but, you know, pull someone over under the influence, what do you do? Or some fatality occurs, or, you know, the local governments are going to be ones that pick up the dime.
Definitely. So a lot of unknowns right now that we still have to.
Yeah. And they got a limited time to deal with it, but I think it's one of those interesting, how we deal with it here nationally, people are watching. You know, it's not like us just doing our thing here in Alaska. People are watching this very carefully, because as people have been watching Colorado, Washington State, Alaska now is on the forefront of this issue.
As well. Yeah. All right. I had one more question.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, in a couple of days, you're hoping to make a decision. If you don't plan to run for mayor, do you plan on maybe seeking a higher office in 2 years?
If you know, if I'm not going to be in public service in the next, you know, if I'm not running in the next few months here, what I do in the future, I don't know. You know, what I've learned over the years, I've never planned on what office to run for. I've always just been very active in the community in public service, and sometimes a position opens up that I think I could run for and actually do some good. That's kind of the bottom line when I look at these issues. I think my work in the private sector, which is where I really originally came from, in the sense before public service, is I've always found myself working and doing stuff on behalf of Alaskans, so in office or out of office. So in 2 years, we'll see. You know, 2 years in politics is like a lifetime, and many lifetimes. And so I'll just wait and see. But right now, like I said, there's some good folks that are lining up for the mayor's race. I'm feeling better and better about that crew of folks. At the same time, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be engaged. You know, if I'm not running for mayor, I'm going to be very engaged in giving my opinion, probably more than people want to hear, about what I think, or where I think there's some challenges, and locally and statewide.
Definitely. What would you say to people that maybe make a comment, if you were to run for mayor, that's a step back from the position that you were in on the national spotlight? What's your response to that? You
know, I would say that you know, it's not about the position you hold, it's what you do with the position. And I always thought about that. When I was mayor, we did a lot of stuff that was on a statewide and national level. When I was in the Senate, I was doing stuff that was considered local in a lot of ways. I think in a lot of uniqueness of my position now as a former U.S. Senator, I think there's a lot of issues on a national level that I could help influence that would impact Alaska. And that's, you know, part of the equation of, do I serve in the mayor's office, try to run for that office, or do I do and use this new opportunity to really help Alaska in a different level? And that's the big part of the equation. I mean, some people will say that, you know, they view politics differently maybe. I view as public service, whatever that position is. But I also think that, you know, I don't sit here and say, well, geez, I'm the only one that can do that. That's why I think seeing these other candidates materialize and lay out their agenda, I think is important. Because if it's just people running to occupy space, that's not what Anchorage needs right now. What Anchorage needs is someone who's going to sit in that office and look at Anchorage in the next 10, 20 years, say, this is where we need to go, and make it happen. And if I can help influence that from the outside, I'll be happy to do that. 2 years from now, who knows? But being a former U.S. Senator, you know, frankly, helps a lot on Alaska issues. I mean, I can still call the White House. I can still call other folks and help make things happen. I literally had a guy call me, a veteran who was trying to get some, and I said, well, I'm not in office anymore. And he said, yeah, but I know you know who to call, so can you help me? And we did. I helped him solve a problem, and I'll continue to do that.
Wherever you can be most effective.
Yeah, and that's how I've always looked at it. When we started, for example, the Mountain View redevelopment project, I wasn't in office. I was a private sector guy working in real estate, and I worked with a couple other people, and we saw an incredible opportunity to move something forward and said, well, let's figure out how to help the community, because that was the community I was raised in. And I said, let's try to help them here. I'll continue to do that, in or out of office. That's not the office is not the determining factor for me to contribute back to the community. I mean, I think this is what you should do, in office or out of office. So I'll continue to do that. But there's a lot of people out there, it's amazing how many people have advice for me. I think I have more advisors now than I've ever had in my life. And it doesn't matter if I'm walking through a restaurant and someone says, you should fill in the blank, or I'm, at this grocery store and someone says, I've been thinking about you. And I'm like, well, who are you?
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about you. And I say, well, I appreciate that. They usually then have some advice of things I should do. And, and it's in a way a lot very humbling, because people are thinking about it. But at the same time, at the end of the day, I'll continue to contribute back to the community in some form or another. It doesn't have to be an elected office, but, I'll see where those roads lead.
Definitely. So we'll know in a couple days, though, if you do plan to run.
A few days, yeah.
All right.
Days, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Mr.
Thank
Begich.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.